So we've already done this. And what we're going to cover today is how new advances in online learning will affect your daily teaching, why you should use active and collaborative approaches to teaching, how to do active learning and informal teamwork in the class, and finally, how to do more formal kind of teamwork activities. So we're going to have a little bit of what's going on right now, and then we're going to step back and look at classical ideas related to how to use active and collaborative techniques in the classroom. So to start with, I just want to show you something. So this is a video of basketball in the 1950s, and it actually shows Wilt Chamberlain as a young basketball star. So you may not realize it, but in the 1950s, all of a sudden, basketball started improving all around the world. Basketball players started getting really, really better. Basketball games got even more exciting. Anyone have an idea why that might be? Exactly right. Television actually did this. All of a sudden, you didn't have to buy tickets, get to the game, and so forth, which you may not have been able to have the advantages to do. In fact, anybody could start watching these videos or watching the television shows. And it made an enormous difference in how good people were at basketball. You could be just some kid, you know, in a very disadvantaged neighborhood, but you could still learn from the very best by watching them. So what are MOOCs? You all know what massive open online courses are, I hope. They're taught through universities, and it's kind of like, now on television stations we have ABC, CBS, NBC, right? So there's standard MOOC providers, which are Coursera, edX, FutureLearn, and there's a few others. So you can basically go and find a MOOC, which is a bit analogous to a television show with a lot of extra material with it. And MOOCs, they might have something like 40,000 students, and it depends on how big it is. If it's a small course on a specialty topic, might have 2,000, could be something much bigger. In fact, Learning How to Learn has 1.7 million. And the growth of MOOCs, there's now about 4,000 of them worldwide. Many of them are from top universities, Princeton, Harvard, and so forth. And so you might say, well, why on earth are you bringing up MOOCs in active learning? And it's because whether you like it or not, MOOCs are your competition. And we've been spoiled for centuries as teachers. You've had a very private classroom experience, and in fact, people really don't compete with you. There may be a few people on campus that teach the same course as you do. So that means that students maybe have 2 or 3 choices, and maybe it's not any choices at all because you're the only one that teaches in the one time slot that they can take the course. So we're just really comfortable with no competition and never having to be better. MOOCs suddenly are out there, and they are college classes that are, in some circumstances, just as good or even better than what is conventionally taught in many college classrooms. So just like the thing is, though, it's just like basketball. We can watch them ourselves and actually learn from them. And we're very wise to do that. In fact, because the online world is really super competitive. It is a mixture of academia meeting Silicon Valley with a little bit of Hollywood, and there's nothing wrong with that. And you combine them all together, and that's what can make a really good MOOC. So it can kind of take the best of how we really rivet on and get excited about material, and it can put that in a video with ancillary materials that can make it very active. And the thing is, people really do love it. So again, our tendency is always to think, online's not competitive with me because, I've got them. They're here. They're face to face. No, it is fully competitive with what you're doing face to face, and so that means that what you're doing face to face has to be better. Now, I do have to give. So I mentioned earlier that my other daughter volunteered to back up the car. So this is our older daughter, and I just want to give you a little bit of a sense of what a really good MOOC can do. You tend to think, maybe a few people would watch a Learning How to Learn MOOC if they're struggling in school. Well, this is our older daughter. She just finished med school. Thank you. I'm so glad, no more debt, right? But while she was, so her task was, that I volunteered her for, was to look like a real dork and to wear these earphones to model the idea of blocking out sounds. So she has these little earphones. So look at the dorky look. She's just so good at this. So, and it so happens that she's got this great big honking pair of earphones on her lap. So she models this idea. So she's in her class in medical school. There's 75 students there with her, right? Her cohorts in her medical school class. The professor there is a very distinguished cardiologist from Southeast Michigan, and he's teaching away, and he suddenly stops the class, points right at her, and says, "You're the girl in the MOOC." So here's this very distinguished cardiologist who's getting something of great value to him, enough to spend his time in watching this. So well-made online materials really can be fully competitive with face-to-face, but again, they can also be a way for you to steal ideas from the best teachers. And really good teachers take ideas from everywhere. And there's all this great stuff out there, just like with basketball players, but we can watch it with MOOCs. And whatever your discipline, you can probably find several MOOCs and some really good ones. You can always email me and there's a outfit called Class Central. And this is a MOOC examination place. What they do is, let's say you're looking for a MOOC on energy systems or electrical circuits or Civil War history. Whatever you're looking for, you can put the search terms in, and then you will get back from Class Central the MOOCs that are on that topic. Then you can go, and Class Central has rating systems. So you can go, and it's just like Amazon. You can go and see whether people like the book, or you can go and see whether people like the MOOC. And this is invaluable. You can kind of pick the best MOOCs on whatever subject matter you want. But one thing to be aware of too is that MOOCs are becoming so popular that there's often MOOCs in topics that you don't even think about. For example, if you are a big fan of, like my husband just loves Laura Ingalls Wilder and the Little House books, right? Little House on the Prairie. There's a MOOC on Laura Ingalls Wilder. So be open and creative in what you might search for. So just to give you a little bit of background, this is our basement, looking much cleaner than usual. And this is where the MOOC was filmed. And so that's me looking kind of dorky myself, standing there. What I do is I crop out the side. So now you see these are the lights. This is the fireplace. That's my husband's little motorcycle there. And crop it out and replace it with a PowerPoint. There you go. I can walk through metaphors. So it's something that makes things enormously sticky. Another thing I just want to touch on really quickly, because I think it's valuable for you as online, since you do a lot of online here, is think about doing very small 4-credit online quiz, whether you have a face-to-face class or an online class. And you know all the really stupid questions you get because people don't read the syllabus? Put a little quiz that has the questions that they always ask because they don't read the syllabus. And if you and make it be 1 point of the class or 5 points of the class out of 100, or something like that, it will save you so much time. And you know how students will come up, I didn't know I was supposed to do that major assignment. You can put it right there in the introductory quiz. I know that I'm supposed to do this major assignment. If you can, try to make the introductory quizzes a little bit funny. So, for example, here, this is an example from the Massive Open Online course, but people would always say, where's the closed captions? Do you have translations? No matter that we put it in the syllabus, put it in everywhere. So we put it in an introductory quiz with a little picture that shows where things are, and we don't get questions anymore. Everybody takes a quiz, and it just works so great. So I just wanted to give that as a little side. So how and why do you want to combine face-to-face and online? The thing is, back in the day, in the 1500s, when textbooks first came out, all the professors were like, textbooks, that's a terrible idea. They did everything they could to squash that idea because, it would mean that you wouldn't need teachers anymore. Well, we know we need teachers, right? So textbooks are actually a really valuable adjunct for teachers in any class. It's the same with online materials. It's the same with MOOCs. They're very valuable and helpful, and you can learn from them yourself. A little trick, and I'd mentioned this before, I use my learning management system. When I do have a little bit of face-to-face interaction with people, I replace their Moodle quizzes, my LMS quizzes, with whatever their face-to-face quiz is, and that serves really well to minimize people's desire to cheat, or at least if they do cheat, then I can kind of call them to task for it. There's usually a small percentage in any class who fool themselves and think that they can pass because it doesn't matter if they flunk the in-class quizzes in the final exam. That's only around 50% of the class. They can ride off of the homework and everybody else's scores, right, when they're doing joint homework and so forth. But with this technique, it works very well to keep them in hand and accountable. So basically, flipped classes, if you can't beat them, join them, right? Use online materials to help you build a better classroom. So why do you want to do active and collaborative learning? I think you've gotten a little bit of a sense of it just from our introductory exercise. It's because there's some things that in-class classrooms can do better. And in this highly competitive environment, if you can do something better, you want to do it better. So a little bit of background here is there was a very important paper published in 1985 by Halun and Hestenes about the initial knowledge state of college physics students. And in essence, what they did was they came up with something called a force concept inventory. And what this was a series of basic questions about physics and concepts in physics to see if students had really learned that concept. So here, for example, there's a little tube, and it's laying flat on a table, and a ball goes around that tube, and you see which way, when that ball comes out, does it go this way? Does it go this way? Does it keep going around? If you've internalized the basic concepts of physics, you know which way the ball should go. But here's the interesting thing. They gave this test at the beginning, and another related version at the end of introductory college physics class. And what they found was that basically the students didn't learn squat. They learned their improvement, and there's sort of technical descriptions of what was meant by an improvement in score. But in essence, there was only a 13% improvement of knowledge and understanding of the basic concepts of physics. And this was horrifying. You've spent an entire semester with these students, and they don't improve very much. And here's what was worse. Actually, it didn't matter how good the teacher was. If you were a terrible teacher, or you were a great teacher, the students did equally badly. So this caused a lot of consternation and research in physics to sort of figure out what the heck is going on. How can we do better? And there was 15 years of kind of upheaval while people were trying to figure out what was going on. And then in 1998, Richard Hake published a paper, and it was a huge study with 6,000 students, to try to make sense of the different approaches that had been tried to get students to learn physics better. And what he found was, in essence, that if you use traditional methods of teaching, talk and chalk, there was very little improvement. If you used active engagement, on the other hand, there was a substantive improvement. And so I'll cut to the chase with a much more recent study. This one is from 2014. It was in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And what he found, what Freeman found, was, in essence, if you have a traditional mode of teaching, 1/3 of your students will flunk out of the class or the program. So it's that old idea of, hey, look to your left, look to your right, one of you is going to be flunking out of this class. But if you used active learning, it was only 20%. So still not as good as we'd like, but what that meant was only 1 in 5 dropped from the program or flunked for the classes in STEM. So these findings were so pronounced that this paper basically said it was unethical to use other kinds of methods, to use the traditional versus active methods, because it's so clear that active in the classroom really makes a difference in how well students do. So I also want to talk about why this occurs. So this person is Judith Rich Harris. She won an award for one of her research papers that was turned into a book called The Nurture Assumption. And what Harris found was that we often think that the reason students, or the reason kids turn out well is because the parents, right? I mean, if we're a parent ourselves, we always think it's us. And then sometimes we think, it's genetics. That's why the kid would turn out well. What her research showed, really quite convincingly and interestingly, was it's actually the peers. The peers make a much bigger difference than the parents or even genetics on how a kid turns out. So this is why you do not want your child falling in with a bad gang, right? But peer groups, and I can personally attest to this. So, for example, for me, I grew up moving all over the place, but I moved twice to Texas. And so now I find that whenever I am really super nervous, I get a Texas accent. So it just comes right back. And the thing is, kids don't get the accent of their parents. They get the accent of the kids around them. And that's because they're listening to the kids around them. So, as I'd mentioned to Dan earlier, I got to go to this conference, to help me it was my very first semester in teaching. And so I won this little award to go to this conference, and so I was trying to figure out, it was my first conference ever, what do I attend, right? So I saw this thing that was on, it was called Student-Centered Learning. a workshop on that. And I thought, gosh, that's the stupidest sounding thing I've ever heard. Yeah, I mean, because we're supposed to be teachers. We're supposed to be up here, giving our knowledge. And so for whatever reason, I decided to go to this workshop. And it was taught by Richard Felder and his wife, Rebecca Brent. And it really, all of a sudden, the light clicked on, and I could see me standing here and talking. It can help, it can potentiate things, but it actually doesn't necessarily put ideas into people's minds, especially really tough ideas. So I had been struggling in my class, so it's it's that first semester there, and this was an electrical engineering class. And so, I'm trying to teach all these things. I come back, and this one student was, have you ever seen the movie Dumb and Dumber? I mean, I probably shouldn't say this, but this student, he was so thick, and he thought, no matter what I said, he said, it's because you're an awful teacher. I couldn't make headway with this guy, no matter what. So I went off to this conference, I come back, and I'd just given him a midterm, and they didn't do that great. So I thought, I'm going to apply some of these new active techniques, so I will have them rework the midterm in class in teams. And there was this hubbub of activity, and students were telling me, I've learned more in this class than I have all semester. And I'm thinking, really? I thought I was doing okay at teaching this class. And then 2 students came up from that guy's group, the one who was the thick one, and they said, you know what? He doesn't know this material. I mean, he doesn't know it at all, and we can't even help this guy. And then the guy himself came up to me and said, you were right. It was me. I didn't understand the material. You could have knocked me over with a feather. I mean, he could never hear it from me, but he could hear it from his compadres. So active learning is something that can be invaluable in helping students to pick up the material and look at it in a different way, and it also has that little bit of competition. If you aren't getting the material and other people are, they can see that, and it's very helpful. So there's another thing about active learning in the classroom, and active, where you're not just focusing on me, but you take a moment, just like we did at the beginning, and you turn to others, and you look at the material in a new way as a group. That moment where you turn away from me, you turn your attention away from me, you're actually activating the diffuse mode, even if it's momentary, and you look at the material with a different perspective. There's some hints that part of the reason active learning, or that collaborative learning, in other words, turning and working with others, is so effective, is not so much the fact that you're working with others, but the fact that you've disconnected momentarily from the instructor. And that can be a very valuable thing. And why else would you do it? It's because if you're teaching something like Maxwell's equations, your students can do this kind of thing pretty easy. It can be awfully dry, and active learning can help, or collaborative learning help to kind of provide a nudge of, at least from the people beside you, to get them going. So why do you want to use active learning? Just a myriad of reasons. They learn more deeply, retain the information more, they're less likely to drop from programs. If they're in a disadvantaged group, it is particularly beneficial. So there's just a myriad of reasons. Now, I know what you're probably thinking is, but I don't have the time to do active learning in my classroom, right? Because I have to cover so much material. So we're going to address that. How do you do active learning? Basically, you give them something to do. Now, this is oriented somewhat towards STEM kinds of things, but the reality is all of these ideas have grown from the humanities and the social sciences. really the humanities kicked off active learning. What do? They meet together, they speak about things, they're really bringing out ideas through talking interactively with one another. So all I'm doing is kind of showing how we're taking humanities and also applying them into the STEM fields. So take those kinds of active activities and you can turn them into team work activities. So you can have people working in pairs or groups of 3 or 4, give them just a few seconds or a few minutes to actively engage and turn them loose. So a key point is that you want to call on an individual or 2 before you ask for open-ended responses. And this is to prevent that idea of 1 or 2 people dominating with their answers. And another thing is you want to, here's what I do. I'm always walking around with active learning. So I can go, they're working together in a team, I can go up, see how they're doing. I see that, maybe Joe is kind of behind, John is doing okay, Jill has really got it. So then when I come up, if it's a really easy problem, right, then I've already seen that Joe has got the easy problem. And so I can call on Joe. And if it's a super, super difficult problem, I may call on Jill, right? So I'll I usually try to tailor it so that there's, the person who knows how to do it is someone who's called on, except that if I see somebody just kind of farting around, then I might call on that person just to get them to point out that I want you to be actively engaged. And just knowing that you could be called on keeps you on your toes through the whole classroom. So there's also something called think, pair, share, which is a standard technique. And then what you'll do is you'll just have the students work individually on a project or on a question, and then you'll ask them to share their answers. And the benefits of this kind of thing is that even if you do just as little as 5 minutes in a 60-minute talk or thereabouts, it can produce major boosts in understanding. Our brains are not designed to focus relentlessly for hours at a time. And in fact, from an evolutionary perspective, if you're looking too intently for too long at the giraffe that you're trying to kill, well, some lion can sneak up on you. We're built to be distracted after a little bit of time. And so building some breaks into your what you're teaching, just kind of, it's a way of addressing the brain's natural way of working. So it also, this kind of thing elbows the students. You want to wake up. And weak students are tutored by stronger students. Stronger students get a deeper understanding, and poor performers are put on notice. So I always try to say to people, and I think they really get this, because when I first started doing active learning, 20 years ago, some students would just be sort of, oh, great, we're working in an active group, I can look at my computer or do something different or just kind of zone out for a little bit. And so I used to give a big lecture on do not zone out. I can tell students who have zoned out because they don't do well. Now I think students are getting more comfortable with active learning and group sort of activities. And so I don't usually have to give them those kinds of lectures. Also, the way I do things often is we'll do a flipped class. So if I have 4 hours roughly in a week, they have a flipped class. So that means they miss one class because I can't ask them to be watching lectures and coming in both. So they only come in for 1 2-hour lecture. For the first hour, we do a practice quiz. And they are really intensely focused on this practice quiz. Why? Because it has some hints for the real quiz. So there's never any issue. They're always very buzz of activity. People are really focused, and that's what you want. So really what I'm doing is every time I see them, the whole time I'm seeing them, they're taking tests. There's like a first practice test that actually doesn't count, but gives them hints for the real test. But it's all testing, and they learn a lot. So you can still cover all the material you normally would cover. You can have handouts that have gaps in them, and so I won't pull this up here, but my electromagnetics notes, for example, I've got maybe a problem at the top and then a big space below where they can work it, and we can work it actively. And here is, I'll give you, one thing I often do is I use PowerPoints, but the PowerPoints have things that have to be filled in class. If you put a PowerPoint slide on and everything is filled in, they will go to sleep. I would go to sleep. It's nothing that's moving, it's nothing static, and they don't actively have to do something. But if you give them notes that are PowerPoints that have blank spaces, you write in the class on the blank spaces, and they do too. What that's doing is, a set is a collection of objects called elements. Elements is the key term I want them to get in their brain. When they write that, that helps them to neurally encode that concept more easily. And so this is an example of me just talking through. I'm actually in front of a class. I've got a tablet, a Wacom tablet on the side, and I'm just talking through and explaining this to them.
And we use that with cross through it. Oh, that will contain it all. Not even
So you can see I'm just kind of filling out the main things here, and it works very well. You can cover much more material by having these sort of partially filled notes. And now you probably already do something like this. Is that, do you do partially filled notes here? Yeah. So it's a great way of covering the material. So humor in online learning and in classrooms is really important, and humor in online is incredibly important. Think about it this way. Okay, so remember there's competition for online learning. If you had a choice between an online class that covered the material, did quite a nice job, and covered the material, did quite a nice job, and was funny, which one would you take? I mean, it's unquestioned. And humor does a lot for students. It's almost like for a moment, you have a flash where you are making these unexpected connections using these very different parts of your brain and giving yourself a little bit of a rest. It's a momentary boop into diffuse mode, and it's helpful for learning. And I'll often notice that when I'm teaching, that I use a little tiny bit of humor, and it relaxes things. And then when they come back, they're refreshed for even the more difficult one. But what do you do if you have super large classes? Super large classes, if 75 students or more, are often a fact of life. And the reality is that the bigger the class, the more important it is to use these kinds of approaches. Students feel much more confident and comfortable in groups of 3 or 4 than they do in great big groups. So the more you can have them working actively with smaller groups, the better they'll be. Now, there is something called Academy that you can use to do groups, large groups, and it works pretty well. But I often do things with I just use handouts and so forth, and we don't have the handouts here, but I'll kind of talk to you just a little bit about some of the information that you can give students. And One thing I often do is I will, at the beginning of a class, unless it's an 800-person class, but if it's something like 20 to 50 or 60, I will, let's say I had a class of 40 students. I would have them count off by 12s. And so, and what by 12 does is it makes a bunch of groups of 4 and several groups of 3. So by 12, I would say, I would tell the students, you will count. So I'll say, you're 1, 2, and they'll count out loud themselves. Then when I get to 12, then the next one, who would have been 13, it's 1, and then 2, and they keep going around. And I tell everyone to remember their number. So I've just gone around. Now there's going to be about 4 1s, 4 2s, right? And I'll say, I want all the 1s to go up here, meet together, and then reform, and then sit down. So 1s here, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I have them meet up. And usually, even though I tell them to meet up and then sit down afterwards, everybody just meets and they kind of mill. And then I say, it's okay, you can go sit down, and they'll all sit down. And what this does is I have just divided the group up, or the class up, into teams where friends are almost certainly not going to be together. Because friends sit by one another. But when you count them off, you've just divided them into teams where the people who are sitting close to them are on a different team, right? So this is a really good way to divide up the class. If you do this at the very beginning of class, it has an additional powerful benefit. You've just rearranged everybody. So they are now sitting with people they, in all great likelihood, don't know. It puts them on their best behavior. So right from the first day of class, sometimes there's power in groups. And when they're sitting with friends, they can kibitz a bit, kind of get but if they're not sitting with friends, everybody's on a little bit better behavior. So it puts you a little bit more in control right from the first day of class. I tell my students, please sit with your teams through the class. And that kind of keeps me also in control through the whole class experience. Now, some more specific techniques. It's pretty much, a large class is a lot like a smaller class. The only difference is it can be better. Why is that? It's louder. Students pick up, everybody gets to working on this, and they're all hearing that everybody else is working on it, and it gets this kind of enthusiasm going just by virtue of the excitement of the kids themselves, and they hear it and they get more excited. I have had instructors come in and say, what are you doing in your class? Everybody's just always so excited. And it's not me, it's kind of turning loose the power of the group, and they really like it. So you want to make sure that you call on individuals, individual groups or teams, as well as individual people. And this, again, helps keep people on their toes. If they know, even if there's a very large group, there is a chance that they could be called on. And it does make a different dynamic. So I do overload calling on the back of the room, again, because that is generally where your most creative people are. And also it's a place where people can kibitz more, feel more easy with kibitzing a little bit. And so it can be a very good thing to overload calling on the back. And I will sometimes tell them that I overload calling on the back of the room. And so if they were going to sit back there, they might be sure to be extra carefully prepared. So avoid calling on volunteers, again, just because that's sort of the kiss of death for other people, because they know they can just relax. Now, another technique is think out loud pair problem solving. This is a super, super valuable technique, probably one of the most valuable techniques. Now, there's two very different theories in education. One is constructivism. and the other relates to cognitive load. Constructivism says we want the students to come up with the ideas. Cognitive load says, you know, students can't come up with everything. They're not all going to be Newtons, and so they sometimes need a little guidance. So I think constructivist approaches work great at lower grade levels, you know, where you've got more fundamental material. But cognitive load sorts of theories work better when you're at much more advanced levels. The reality is we really aren't all Newtons. And sometimes it can help to see, I mean, we would never sit somebody down at a piano and try to teach them how to play a concerto by saying, okay, come up with it. You know, you just can't quite do that. You do it, you model and play the concerto first, and then that shows them kind of what they should be driving at. So what TAPS does is it's the same fundamental idea. You have a worksheet or something of that nature, and you ask students to look through this worksheet and figure out why the steps have proceeded or unfolded in the way they are. Because a lot of times, a derivation can be so, or the first time you see a problem and you're trying to solve it, or a new concept that has a lot of aspects to it, it can be so complicated that you don't even know where to start. But if you can sit with a friend and kind of walk slowly through it together and say, oh, now they did this, why'd they do this? Oh, that's why they did this. It's a really, really powerful way of looking at it. So basically in this technique, you just have the students work in pairs through a worked out problem solution or a derivation. You can have some parts that are left unfilled out, and one student will explain to the other student, and the other one is supposed to question unclear statements or give hints, and then you periodically stop the students and call for explanations. And oftentimes what happens is, as you're wandering around, you'll see that, you know, everybody seems to be hung up on the third step. Why is that? And so you can go up to the board and say, hey, look, this third step, now here's a little bit of insight into why that's actually occurring. So if you want to, you can also have them, once they're done, they can reverse the roles, and that really reinforces. So again, it's often, how do I cover all the material? The typical course has about 40 contact hours, and if you spoke just like that, you could actually read an entire textbook, every aspect of it, and you could get through every bit of it. But you do have to use some common sense. What can you really cover and you want to focus students' attention on the main points. The biggest mistake that brand new professors make, in my experience, is they come in and they're really working to do a great job. And so they cover everything. And they lose perspective about what are the key points. I want to make sure they got the key points. And that's what you need to be focusing on when you're trying to teach. Your job is to, anybody can read a book. Anybody, but the books can be really hard to get through. A good teacher's job is to synthesize that material and give really simple explanations of what is put out as a complex bit of material, but make it so that it's digestible, and also to convey their own passion for the material. So to make your lectures worthwhile, punctuate them with active learning. It can't all be active learning, at least in STEM. We do have to convey some information. And these active exercises will energize your students, focus their attention on what's most important, and the increased learning will more than make up for that slight loss of material that you weren't able to cover. I had mentioned I often use problem-based learning in my classes, so I'll give them One thing that didn't come out in our earlier discussion of television versus in class is that what television can do is, well, let's see, well, going back to, so on this kind of approach with problem-based learning, you're making it so that, again, it's just giving the students something active, and they know they're going to be tested on that exactly and immediately. And so this is a great approach for your students, and then just give them half a class with this kind of approach, and then give a test, and it works out great. So what you do teach in class can have a lot more impact, and you can also do things like travel a little more, or do more research, or do whatever you might like. It is a very, very big deal to students to be able to stop and replay a lecture. And we often forget that, we neglect that. And another thing is, when you're sitting in class and you're watching me, you're thinking, oh, they have the optimal experience in class watching the teacher, whereas at home there could be these distractions. But what I hear from students is something that's actually the reverse of that. That in class, there's somebody flirting right in front of them, somebody else is banging in and coming out. There's a lot of distractions in a class, but when you're at home and you're watching the video, you can actually really focus in a way that you can't in class. So I was very surprised to hear that kind of thing, but it's apparently quite true. So there can be advantages and disadvantages either way. But another big advantage of active learning is you get what the students get, because you're walking around and you're seeing what they're doing. It's so easy when you're doing talk and chalk to think, I explained it perfectly. They must all get it. And of course, they don't often. So you're not just their professor anymore, you're their coach. One little tip that, again, if you have smaller classes, anywhere from 10 to 50 or something, I will often start the class, when it's an active learning class, I will have the students go around at the very beginning of class, and they're supposed to say their name, and I'll write this on the board because they'll get nervous and they'll forget what I'm asking for. So I'll say, I want you to put your name, I want you to put your major, your hobby, your favorite book, movie, or television, so I get ideas of things I want to look at, right? And something interesting about you that probably is not true of anyone else in the class. And then I ask them to please listen as it's going around, because I say, you're going to make friendships in this class. And some of the people you meet here, you will know for years. So try to listen. If someone else here plays soccer, you probably want to meet that person. So they go around, it's the icebreaker, and you think, and also that icebreaker is an excuse for me to introduce myself. Because as people are going around and they say, oh, my favorite show is Breaking Bad or something, and I'll say, oh man, I went to Breaking Bad, and I took an RV tour around the set in Albuquerque or something. I mean, whatever wacky thing it is, I've usually read the National Enquirer and I know kind of a little bit about it, or you can ad-lib something. And students like to learn a little bit about you, and you can usually kind of make a connection as it's going around. But I have heard from student after student that this little icebreaker at the beginning of class is what made active learning be much more powerful in the class, because they felt really comfortable with one another. The ice was broken. So if you're doing more formal teamwork inside and outside class, the key rule is you form the teams. And I'll tell a little bit more about why that is, but what it helps to do is to keep those that are most at risk of dropping out from dropping out. It's not a popularity contest anymore, and it reduces cheating, because you don't have friends with friends or relatives with relatives. It puts the instructor in control, and it improves the chance of students later getting jobs. So what do I mean by that? There was a paper some years ago called The Strength of Weak Ties that Mark Granovetter submitted to a journal called the American Sociological Review. And so Granovetter submitted this, and here's the review. This should make you feel good, right? Here's the review he got back. This manuscript should not be published for an endless series of reasons that immediately come to mind, right? So, of course, he was crushed, right? And he put it in a drawer, and it sat in the drawer for like 3 years. And he took it out, brushed it up a little bit, and he resubmitted it. And it has now become the most cited paper in all of sociology. So if you get a bad review, just remember Mark Granovetter. But what his paper found was, how do you get jobs? It isn't through good friends. It is through acquaintances. And so when you assign people to new groups, you are assigning people to make new acquaintances. So you're actually increasing their chances of getting a job. I explain this to my students, and I do this before they can come up at the end of the class and ask to be put in another group with their friends. So I say, that's why I won't say that, and then people don't come and bother me about that. So as we had done here, I explained earlier about how you count off to form teams, and I warn them about no team switching. And then I hand out something called the Team Expectations Agreement. And so Dan has a copy of the paper. And so if you'd like this paper, it's called Turning Student Groups into Effective Teams, and it's available online. And also Dan's got a copy, or you can pop an email to me. And what this expectations agreement, it just sort of basically says, okay, what does your team agree to as acceptable behavior on the team? And you will put that down, and then you will sign your names to it. And normally what people put down are things like, I will answer email. I will answer the phone or return phone call messages. And that's all you're really looking for, is that they will sign a document that says that they will function effectively together as a team. So a second thing is, and this is it's an essay that's at the end of this paper, and it is called Coping with Hitchhikers and Couch Potatoes on Teams. The worst thing we do in team activities is we just turn them loose. And if there's any problems, we say the team has to solve the problem themselves. This is why students hate teamwork, because there will inevitably be some students who are just too busy, right? They're just doing too much, and they're going to blow the team off. And the team, and we give no tools to that team about how to handle this, except to say, you do it, you figure it out. So what you want to do is what this paper says is basically that sometimes you will have a student on your team who goofs off and doesn't do anything. And if you have that student, you will not put their name on the paper. And just giving the ability to not put a person's name on the paper if they didn't do squat on the assignment is so powerful. It really makes teams work together more effectively. And also, if they're not working, they don't get the grade for it. So it works out beautifully. So you want to empower your teams. Susan Cain, one thing I do want to point out is, has anyone read Susan Cain's book, Quiet? It's a wonderful book. And she's an introvert, a really big introvert. And so what she recommends is, please stop with all the group work, right? Because some people are kind of shy and they're introverted. And we don't want to have everybody be cookie cutter the same. And a lot of times, students spend so much time in group work that it can kind of kill their creativity because you're sort of acquiescing to the team. So I think having a little bit of balance, not doing everything as group work, is also a good thing to keep in mind. So at any rate, I have this essay that just says basically, what this essay does is it says, I am the teacher. I know some of you will goof off. And if some of you do, you will not get any grade, right? And so I have the students write this reflective essay about it, maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs, to know that they've read this essay. And it makes groups work so much better because I'm not just like turning everything over to teams where people are not really empowered to protect themselves on those teams. So students can really fool you. And if you just say, well, you guys figure it out, if they come to you, there can be some real dysfunctionality, and they can't really handle that kind of thing themselves. So don't allow students to fire a student from their team, but leaving the name off is actually good enough in many instances. Very rarely will I allow a student to be fired from a team, and there was a student once, and his name was Indeedy. So I would always say, yes, Indeedy. And I actually fired him from his team, and he came back 3 years later and just said that was a turning point for him, and it really made a big difference in his life. So let's see, peer rating. So using this form, you can actually have peers evaluate one another. And I don't usually look at the grades. You can factor them into a grade if you want to. What I do look at is the comments. And the reason I look at comments is for two different purposes. One is to see if somebody is malingering, but the other is to see who is being really good, but I haven't been able to catch that in class. Often, like far more often than a malingerer, I will learn of some very quiet student who really never says a word in class, but behind the scenes, they're a powerhouse on their team, and they're so helpful for people. And I think it's just good to know that kind of thing. So you can convert these peer ratings into something that can affect a teamwork grade if you want to do that. And there's this paper walks you through exactly how to do that. Again, if you use Academy, you can do all of these kinds of things automatically. There's also an evaluation of progress towards effective team functioning in that paper, and so you can just hand that out, and it just asks things like, do you talk for a half an hour before you get started? That's not very effective. So it's a good check sheet. Occasionally, you may have to sermonize. And so, and this would involve something like a crisis clinic. So a crisis clinic, what is that? Say somebody comes up to you and says, we have this guy on our team, and he's such a bully. He's just always dominating the conversation. We can't really work very well together because of this person. I might come into class the next time and say, oh, we're going to take 3 minutes here, and I want to brainstorm a little thing. What would you do if on your team there was a person who was a bully, who dominated the conversation? I want you to go into your teams, and I want you to brainstorm ways to deal with this. Now, I want to make it perfectly clear, I am not even suggesting anything illegal, but purely as a mental exercise, whatever techniques you come up with to deal with this individual can be either legal or illegal, and you have 3 minutes on your mark to set, go. And they brainstorm ideas, and then afterwards, I will pick some groups, and then I'll jot down a few things, and put sugar in gas tank, or whatever. But what this is actually doing, and students will get really excited about this, because usually whatever it is, they've experienced this too, and the person who's the problem suddenly catches what the whole room thinks about this. And it can really open their eyes and make a big difference. So what if you have the team from hell, right? And they're constantly arguing, they're complaining. Are you at fault? Is the team at fault? What's going on? The reality is there is never a 100% instructional guarantee for any kind of technique that you use. If you have 10 teams in your class, say, most of them are functioning pretty well, most of them are learning as much or more than they were when you were teaching in the traditional fashion, you have one single dysfunctional team. Congratulations, that's good teaching. Thank you so much.